All right. Good morning, everybody. This is Coffee with Coaches. I am Coach Reese here with Coach Loretta. We're going to be talking about super compensation today. So are you recovering or are you adapting? Before we get into that, Loretta, what's new?
So last night I had the opportunity to go for a run with one of my athletes, which is a local athlete and also a friend. And it was interesting because we actually dove into a little bit of this conversation, and I can kind of share that as we move along, I think, into our conversation. But that was one of the things. He's training for his first 100, and he has a 50-miler coming up. And we were talking about, is it, his legs are starting to feel heavy. Is that normal? What do we do with that? So I'm glad that we're going to talk about it today, because I think a lot of people can benefit.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. And this is one of those topics that is a lot more like psychology based, in my opinion, as well as physically based. Because a lot of us just love to go out and train as hard as we can. And we don't think about, like, are we, just recovering to feel better, or are we adapting to improve our abilities? So that's awesome. And it's funny how, like, serendipitous it is when, we're talking with our athletes about certain things. Like, all these topics just end up lining up so well with our lives and our coaching. So it's super fun getting on and actually talking about these and sharing ideas.
Absolutely. So. And it's always nice too to have confirmation as we're talking together that, like, oh, this is what I said, and I wait and see what you're thinking. And, we often have very similar thoughts, and that's kind of nice just to have that confirmation.
Yeah, there's not so much that we disagree on, so we got to find that one thread and maybe have like a gentle
debate.
Person debate, a gentleman's debate on the podcast here. But before we dive into it, I guess the one thing that's new with me is I got my first suit ever. This is totally not running related, but over the past week and a half, I went to Men's Warehouse. I got it all fitted out because me and my girlfriend have a couple weddings coming up. So I'm trying to think of every opportunity that I could possibly wear this suit. So next podcast, I think I wanna put it on and
perfect. I like this.
Be a little bit more dressed up and look like a news anchor.
Oh, darn! Too bad you weren't available for Hennepin aid station. A tux might look great.
I don't know. Then I would have to find a way to dry clean it, right? I think it would.
That's true.
I'm going to be pretty protective over this suit. So it's my goal to be buried in that suit. So here's what I'm thinking is, over life, I never want to gain too much weight, or when I'm at, later on in life, I never want to lose too much weight when I'm older. So that's my goal. But
that's awesome. So listeners, make sure you're back next week with Reese and his suit.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? Okay. So this is.
You could do maybe a Guinness Book World Record running the suit in 100 miles. Just throwing it out there.
You know what? Yeah. Let's take a look. One of the listeners will have to get back to us on what the world record is for that. But speaking of, next week, I guess I'm actually not going to be on the podcast. I'm going to be out in Idaho at the wedding. So we fly out on Tuesday. So this is live for everybody. I don't even think I told you, Loretta.
No, this is a shocker.
But yeah, this wedding is next week. It's going to be next week, Saturday. So we're flying out on Tuesday. We're going to spend a couple days in Salt Lake, and then going over to Idaho. We're going to do the wedding out in Idaho, and then tool around Yellowstone a little bit, probably do a little bit of exploring in the mountains and stuff like that in Idaho. So it's going to be awesome, but I will not be here next week.
Awesome. So, my daughter just came back from a trip from Idaho and did some hiking.
I think it's really the hidden secret of the trail running world, because there's not a lot of, I don't think there's any 14ers out there. I think there's a couple 13ers and a mess of 12ers. But apparently, from what I've heard, and I don't know how factually correct this is, but I've heard that a lot of those trails compared to Colorado are a lot more burly, a lot more unmarked and not well traveled. So for the people that are going for more of that backcountry experience, or that bushwhacking experience, that navigational experience where you're not just on a guided trail the entire time, that might be some good playground for you.
Right. She sent some amazing pictures, so I'm sure it's going to be beautiful.
Well, cool. So on to our topic today. Are you recovering or are you adapting? I think, to kind of set the stage, I kind of want to go through, and for any viewers that are out there, you're going to get a little bonus because I'm going to try to share my screen here in a couple seconds. Loretta, if you could get that set up for me.
Yes.
There is this cool graph that really details the stress response curve of supercompensation. And what supercompensation is when we impose a stress or a demand on our body, it insults it. And that insult is the driver for our body to say, you know what? I don't want this to be so insulting again in the future. So I'm going to get a little bit stronger. So the next time, my body decides to incur the same stress, I'll be a little bit more able to handle it. And we see this when, we go and we run a 5K and then we think to ourselves like, oh, like I want to try to narrow down my time. So you do some targeted training, you get fitter, and you can run faster. So that super compensation is just the process of your body getting better through targeted exercise. So I'm going to share my screen right now, and we're going to take a look at this response curve. Okay, cool. So I'm screen sharing. It is?
Now it's good. Now we can see it. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. You bet. So this is the graph. We have performance on the left. We have time on the right. And this gray line is kind of your baseline fitness. So there's three lines that go through this graph. The green, the yellow, and the red line both all detail how much stress you're imposing on your body through a particular workout or through like a timeline, right? So let's just have a snapshot. Let's just say this is one workout. The green line is going to represent that workout was just right for you. It insulted your body just a little bit so that way you could recover and then get stronger. The yellow line is a little is a little too little of a response to elicit an adaptation, and the red is you went way too hard. And I think, Loretta, you and I always talk about this in the sense of we can run our intervals a lot harder than we actually really need to get fitter. So I think this red line is a good example of that. So what this shows is that at the start, before the workout, you're at your base level of fitness. If we follow the green line, you insult the body enough, you give it a good enough workout so that way you actually lose a little bit of baseline fitness. And this is what everybody experiences when you get done with a hard workout, you're kind of cashed, and maybe for the next day or two, like you don't feel like going out for another hard workout. Your body's in a little bit of a deficit, and you need to recover in order so that way that green line or your body's ability, your body's fitness can improve. So we see this green line, we're tracing it all the way back up to the fitness baseline. So what happened is over time, we got a decrease in fitness after doing that workout. But then if we give enough time and we give enough recovery, eventually that green line starts to climb above your baseline fitness result. And this is what is referred to as super compensation. So you give it enough time, and if you don't train anymore, then you get this decline or this negative adaptation back down to your baseline fitness. So that was a lot of words, but it just describes how working out isn't necessarily the driver to getting better. Working out is the insult to your body, with which then you need to recover from in order to see the gains from the workout. And this is where, say if you work out hard on Monday, you're not really going to see any super compensation benefits for, at the earliest, a few days, but at the latest, maybe a couple weeks. We always talk about the aerobic system adapting a lot slower than the anaerobic system. So say if you're trying to look for aerobic gains, this timeline could actually be, weeks to months. If you are doing like hard track sprints or hard track intervals, things like that, you can see super compensation a little bit more quickly because we're not actually building physical structures, but relying on enzymatic adaptations that are a little bit quicker to appear and a little bit quicker to disappear. So this graph in and of itself, and this topic that we're really talking about, is very relative to what types of workouts you are running and what adaptations you are looking to see. But the general principle remains is that when we work out, we dig our body into a hole with which we then need to recover from in order to materialize any of those adaptations that we're looking to see.
Right. I think that's why when we talk about a lot on our podcast about the importance of running slower, in that zone 1 or RPE of, 3 to 5 in 80% of our workouts. And that's why that is, so important.
Mm-hmm. And I oftentimes tell my athletes this, that if anybody out there wants to think about your workouts this way, I'll usually give 2 at most 3 key workouts, and that's maybe like in the like meat and potatoes of the season or something like that. So that's 2 to 3 workouts where you're actually trying to go for pace and you're trying to go for intensity. And those are the days where we're actually trying to look for adaptation. But oftentimes my athletes are running between 5 to 6, maybe even sometimes 7 days a week. So, you know, you have 2 days where you're actually looking for hard adaptation. And then you have 5 other days where you're running. Like those other days are just in support of 2 days. So that way you don't overtrain, right? So we hit it hard for 2 days and then maybe we're running the rest of the days, but we're going so easy that it's just to support the work that you've already done. So those other runs, we're really not looking for like a hard stimulus. Oftentimes I'll tell my athletes or write it in their program training, like go easy, stop and take some pictures, like don't worry about it, collect some heartbeats. If you want to walk, go for it. Like try to get the mileage, but I don't even care how long it takes. You don't even look at your watch, you know? So, and I do like that graph too, because, you know, like our bodies can go a lot harder than what it takes to actually see some type of adaptation or some sort of bump in fitness.
Right.
So
I think
we talked about this last week.
Yep, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, we talked about this last week, sorry. You know, when we're talking about running tempo intervals, say if we do 2x10 or 3x10, you should leave that workout, you know, at 3 sets of 10 minutes at a tempo intensity. You should leave that workout not feeling super cashed, because you're only getting a total of 30 minutes of what you could potentially do for an hour 15, hour 20 or so. So if I give an athlete like a certain pace range, you know, like I fully expect that, you know, like you could run 3x10 way faster than that. But at the same time, like for the adaptations that we're looking for, that's just way too hard. And it's going to make it so that way you have to recover. Your recovery takes a lot longer in order to then get another stimulus in.
Right. And I think you'll sometimes see training plans where maybe it is the interval workout, let's say, that it kind of changes over 3 weeks. So the first two weeks may be more similar. Maybe you're running 3, or let's say you're running 6 400s, you know, for the first 2 weeks. And then that third week, you change that stimulus a little bit. So you're starting to see some of that super compensation by that third week, because now maybe instead of 4 sets of 600s, now maybe you're going to do 6 sets of 800s, but you're going to have that benefit from that 4 sets of 600 or 400s, you know, a few weeks back. I might have missed those numbers up, but you get my idea, right?
Yeah, I totally love that idea. And Steve Magnus and John Marcus talk about this a lot on their podcast. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the name, but I'm going to get it soon here. Where we can either like extend the workouts that we're running, or we can intensify them, right? So we're not always looking to make everything faster or harder. Sometimes we're looking to just like build your endurance of like, okay, well, these are some intervals that maybe you could only sustain a total of 15 minutes of before, and now you're able to sustain a total of 25 minutes. That's great, because now your durability, your robustness, your endurance has increased. Even though maybe you're not running them any faster, you're able to produce that same speed or that same intensity for a lot longer, which is a bump in fitness.
Right.
So things don't always have to get faster in order to be a better stimulus for you. And I think that's kind of what you were going for.
Yeah, that's where I was going. I just couldn't remember all those numbers in my head.
And that's why it's always nice for us coaches to have it on paper or like on a computer.
Right.
Like I have so many tabs open when I'm programming for my athletes. I have like their overall plan. I have the Final Surge app that we use. Like I'll have some other calculators on in the background, and then I'll have some Red Hot Chili Peppers playing on YouTube screen, you know? So love it though. So I guess, you know, back to the original topic of, are you recovering or are you adapting? I think this is where, you know, things get a little bit fuzzy, because everybody is different. Everybody has a different recovery capacity. Everybody has a different need for how hard and how long their stimulus needs to last in order to build their body better, right? So Loretta, I kind of want to ask you personally right now, like the way that you're training, are you recovering or are you adapting?
Currently, the way I'm training, I'm more in recovery. I'm coming off of some niggles that I'm working out. So I'm pretty much doing everything at that fairly easy pace. And so I'm recovering. I'm not putting any big stimuluses in there right now.
Mm-hmm. And that's good, because that will keep your baseline fitness where it's at. So that way, when you are healthy to the point where, like you can start peppering in those workouts, your body's going to have that base level of fitness with which you can then build those adaptations on.
Right. And I feel like, that's what's been working for me. So I've been working through some niggles. My volume has been much lower than it typically is, but I've been able to maintain my aerobic fitness. So I feel like once I'm 100%, I'm going to be able to easily transition into, to that. So, yep.
Yeah, you've been biking and doing a lot of cross training, like you were mentioning on the podcast before.
Yep.
So, like when we talk about central cardiovascular benefits and then peripheral skeletal muscular benefits, like no matter what you do, like your heart and your lungs have to pump blood and ventilate. So those two systems don't know if you're biking, if you're running, if you're stand-up paddleboarding, if you're cross-country skiing, if you are roller skiing on the ground, if you're jump roping, like whatever. If your heart is to pump, your heart is to pump. If your legs have to ventilate, or if your lungs have to ventilate, they have to ventilate.
Yep.
But that's where I think too, where when you do come back in, it's like, okay, let's like be diligent about building up the running miles, because the legs haven't experienced the stimulus of running in a while.
Right.
And that's where a lot of that adaptation for you is probably going to occur,
Right, for sure. How about you? Where are you at with it? Are you recovering?
That's an interesting question. And I think currently I'm still digging my well. So if we are thinking about that graph, right? I am stressing my body, and I'm stressing it day over day over day over day. And I'm slowly digging like like my baseline fit. Like I'm below my baseline fitness right now. I can feel it. The way that I came to that conclusion is that, my legs feel pretty heavy. I need to be sleeping a little bit more than I currently am. I'm a little bit tired. But at the same time, like I'm fully expecting this, because I know that like, hey, I wanted to build my mileage up. I wanted to have some higher volume weeks and try to sustain that. So that way later on in the year, when I come a little bit closer to my goal events, I'll have that base level of fitness, so like I'm building my base right now.
Right.
Since my mileage is higher, like I fully expect that, like, on some mornings I'm not going to wake up feeling like super chipper, but at the same time, I don't want to feel super cashed that like I can't go to work, I can't be positive, I can't get my home stuff done, I can't be there for my girlfriend, like things like that, Right. So, but the thing is like I mentioned, next week we're going to Idaho. So I think that, I'm trying to naturally build in that recovery week of like, hey, like we're just going to go on vacation and we're going to hang out. We're going to have a great time. If I can get some miles in, awesome. If it's biking, if it's hiking, whatever, that's totally fine by me. So I think that was the whole idea of the couple weeks leading up into the vacation. So I guess that would be a tip for anybody out there. If you have something where that like, hey, training might be a little hit or miss, maybe we call that your recovery week. And then we try to plan like, hey, the month beforehand, what are you going to do for your workouts? So that way that can be your body's downtime, like there's going to be plenty of cross training for me and my girlfriend. There's going to be plenty of cool sites to be seen and to be had. So I don't want to worry about having to get my miles in or wanting to get my miles in. Of course, I would love to get out into the mountains and spend some time out there, and we might be able to make that work one or two of the days. But yeah, I mean, like right now I'm running my workouts, and the way that my body feels is it's like, man, like I'm completing these workouts, but I'm not feeling like, bam, I got that pop, So that's how I kind of know that like I'm kind of digging the hole down a little bit, which then kind of tells me that like, hey, like you really have to be watching your body for your IT band flaring up again. You have to watch your body for your mood and maybe like ankle pains and all those little things that kind of pop up. Just making sure that those little things stay like little things or even go away, because I really don't want the dials to be turned up on any sort of injury. Because of course, your body is going to be able to super compensate a lot better if you don't go into a recovery week or a recovery period injured.
Right.
So what I'm hoping is that over the next week, week and a half or so, like if I give my body some recovery, I'll see that fitness graph start to increase back up to my fitness level, or my baseline fitness level. And then my body's going to say, hey, you've been putting in a lot of hard work. I don't want that to ever stress you out again so much. So then it starts to super compensate and get a little bit stronger. So that way, when I come back into training again after the recovery period, I'm going to be able to handle a little bit more work, or the work that I'm currently doing isn't quite as taxing on the body.
Right.
So
a few things on that, so one thing talking about vacation, I love that you mentioned that, because I feel like, we love running, but we also have life outside of running. And so, for instance, I have an athlete right now that's on a 2-week honeymoon out of the country. And so we planned ahead, like, okay, these are the weeks she's going to be off. So we're going to call this, more of a recovery week. And like you said, she's going to be doing a lot of hiking, exploring. So we're building all of that into her plan so she can go and have fun and not be so stressed about what's on my training plan today. So I think that that's a really good key thing to take away, so that I think it really helps us with burnout too. So we're not getting so caught up in that's all of our life that we get burnt out because we can't enjoy the other things that are happening around us. So I'm glad that you said that. And then also, I want to go back on what I said. I said I was recovering, but then I thought I forgot about an important piece of what I'm doing. I'm doing a lot of strength training right now. So I'm doing a lot of heavy strength, and also, I'm kind of blending it together with some endurance strength and some heavy strength. So with that, I would say I'm more adapting, right? Because I am continually working to build strength every week. So, I think looking at running and strength training, I guess when I look at it all together, I'm probably doing a little bit of both. And I think I lost Reese for a second, either that or he's meditating because his eyes are closed. So I'm going to keep going with this, and hopefully Reese will be able to pop back in a second. The other thing I wanted to mention that Reese just talked about was, feeling and thinking about those little things that might be nagging you a little bit, and being cautious with this. This is another thing I kind of talked about with one of my athletes was, thinking about, we want to go on the edge of pushing ourselves, but don't want to go over that edge. We don't want to get into the point of injury and the point of no return, right? So we need to be always, and I said this many times on our podcast, listening to our body and being in tune with that, so that we know where how we're feeling, and we're communicating that with, if you have a coach or with yourself as you're adjusting your training plan, that you're not getting to the point where you've pushed yourself so hard that you're into that, when we talk about that chart, when we're down and we're digging ourselves so deep that we can't come out, and we end up with injury, and then we end up taking time off. So I think thinking about that, where you are, even if you have a training plan, it's not something that's set in stone. A training plan is something that we have to be flexible with, because our bodies are changing all the time too. So Reese, I don't know if you can see your picture, but now Reese is back, for those of you that can't see Reese, and he's no longer meditating. So he's back and he can talk to us. I said, maybe you were meditating up there. I don't know, eyes closed. Oops, you are on mute. You're on mute, Reese.
I'm trying not to lose my marbles as my computer crashes out again here too. I love this computer. It's been with me for a long time. It's been great, but it keeps overheating. So I think, maybe this is a good lesson to us that, in the heat of summer, like, you're not gonna be able to go quite as hard, just like my computer. So, and like we were talking about before, like I hate buying new technology. So I think I'm just going to have to suck it up and go into the Best Buy and, tell them that I know absolutely nothing about computers, and see where the recommendations go. I feel like maybe that's a good lesson for all of us too, that, sometimes you got to admit when things get tough and you don't know something, and you need to ask for help, and you need to get some support, so.
For sure. I think if you wore your suit into Best Buy and asked about it, it might even come off a little better.
Mm-hmm.
Another opportunity.
So, but yeah, I like everything that you said before I cut out about strength training and adapting that way, because there isn't just this one adaptive thing that our bodies are moving towards day to day. Like, that graph that we saw earlier was more of the like running related super compensation graph. Whereas, like maybe that graph is hovering around baseline, but then your other graph that we haven't looked at yet, your strength training graph, is currently increasing, or you're going through the stress, recovery, and adaptation response.
Right.
And something that a lot of coaches talk about, and that is like the old moniker of like stress plus rest equals adaptation. And when we were looking at that graph earlier and we saw those three different lines, one with a stimulus that is just right, one that's a little too weak, and one that's a little too hard. I think with what we were talking about with recovery, some people, they go through their entire athletic careers of always doing 20 miles a week. And that is just what they do, because Monday is a 5 mile, Tuesday is a 5 mile, and then Saturday we have our 10-mile long run or whatever it is. And so now those types of stimuli are probably a little bit too weak to get you in adaptation. So, that's where that whole gray zone of training comes in, where it's like, you're not like stressing your body hard enough to dig yourself into a hole so that you give your body a chance to recover and adapt. You're just kind of hovering just above and just below this baseline.
Right. I love that, because we actually just had an athlete sign up with one of our coaches, and his goal is a 50 miler, but he's training for a marathon. But then when I was talking to him a little bit about what his training looked like, he's putting a nice mileage, but it's just that it's just mileage. There's no, quality in his workouts. So we discussed that and talked about how much that could enhance his training if he added some of that quality workout into his training plan. And he hadn't really thought about that. I don't think he realized the benefits of it until I talked with him and another coach talked with him. And so now he's signed up and he is going to get some training for this marathon, which I think is going to really set him up nicely to then move into 50-mile training. So it's interesting, because sometimes I think we just like, well, I'm just in the mindset of I'm just going to run this race to finish. Well, you could just run that race to finish, but you could run it and to finish feeling good. That could make that difference, right? By really having more of a training plan that is well organized to build you to that race.
Yep. And that's where too, that stress curve that we were looking at, that is in totality. So that is your volume as well as your intensity. So let's say your body is its base level fitness is running 30 miles a week, and it's fine. That's not really going to send a signal anymore to adapt. You're not going to have to recover from anything because your body's just used to that anyways. So we can take that same athlete and not change anything about their volume, but start to pepper in some specific types of intensity workouts. And those can be the driver for, insulting the body a little bit, needing the athlete to recover a little bit. So that way you can super compensate from that now, that stressful stimulus.
Right.
So there's plenty of ways to dissect it. And I think it's a really amazing and simple graph that just details all of these complex situations that are going on with the body. So and the important piece of this is that you don't just stress your body and then adapt. If you skip that recovery piece, you're not going to be able to adapt. You're going to be stressing your body and stressing your body. You're going to produce too much of a stress response that you can't really climb out of. You just get right back up to your base level fitness because your body is too tired to actually devote energy and resource to getting stronger. It's devoting all that energy and resource into just getting back to where you were,
Right.
So where we want to run our workouts with intention, we want to run them with purpose. We want to run prescribed paces by a coach if you're looking for a specific outcome. We don't want to run them too hard, because we all know that it's not the workout hero that gets stronger. It's the person that's putting in good work consistently, not great occasionally.
Right. And then, I think this kind of tags onto something that we've talked about before. And we also have a listener question about how does this relate to inflammation? And, when do we want inflammation? When do we not want inflammation so much? And what do we do with that information?
Absolutely. I think that's a phenomenal question, because Like everything in the literature is pointing towards inflammation being the marker, the thing that informs your brain and the rest of your body that like, hey, we just got an insult, so we need to devote resources to not only repairing skeletal muscular damage, but repairing any other damages, as well as like replenishing, epinephrine and norepinephrine and these different like adrenal neurotransmitters that help us like turn our body on and like get performance out of ourselves. So that inflammation is crucially important in the recovery and then the adaptive response. If we quell all of that inflammation after a workout, your body's not going to recognize that like, hey, there was some trauma here, there was some damage here, because you're blunting that inflammatory response. So I actually had I have a good link to an inside article or an inside tracker article that I want to share that details this. But while I'm popping that up, Loretta, we actually talked about this a long time ago in one of our podcasts about recovery, and it was specifically about like cold plunges and cold baths, ice baths. I think it's a really like prevalent idea that like, hey, ice baths are really good for us, which they are. I think that like overall, like ice baths do really great at kind of like restoring the parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system, kind of getting the body cooled down, and quelling some of that inflammation like we were talking about. But at the same time, there's always a proper time and a proper place for any type of recovery response. So we see this a lot too with vitamin intake. If you take a lot of vitamin C or vitamin E or vitamins that kind of like soak up all these free radicals that are built up with hard training, you are kind of quelling the response that you're quelling the signal that your body needs in order to get stronger. So we kind of want to bathe the body in a little bit of this inflammation, so that way your body can start making those adaptive responses. Do you remember that conversation about the ice baths? Do you remember?
Yeah, I do. I think I do remember that. Another thought I have as you're talking about this is, well, a few things. So I have just actually did a course or training recently through 80/20 endurance on the autoimmune athlete. So I think that there's some different factors, so when I'm thinking about this and the things you're saying, I personally have Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune disorder. And so I have to think about inflammation a little differently, because I have to be careful with certain things that I eat that may make me have too much inflammation, right? So I think that there's an athlete that doesn't have any kind of health conditions and those athletes that do. And I think that looking at that inflammation piece could look a little bit differently. I personally have also done the inside tracker testing like 7 days out from a race. So it was interesting to see those results and all of the elevated inflammation markers, which I think you can talk about that a little bit more with your article that you have with Inside Tracker. And then again, having it checked, several weeks out from the race and how they have normalized. But it's good information to have for me, because now I know where my inflammation, what it is looking like post race, right? And then that can help me guide my training, forward, I think. So I think a few different factors come in when we're thinking about inflammation too.
Yep. And even to the idea that there is chronic inflammation and there's acute.
Yes.
Are completely different. Chronic inflammation is going to be that low level of inflammation that keeps your body in this slightly heightened like state of awareness, and that can be because of stress levels, because of life levels, because of foods that your body doesn't necessarily like that are pleasing to your taste buds, so we continue to eat them. It has to do with chemicals and ingredients that are in a lot of our foods nowadays. It happens to do with chemicals and ingredients that we put on our bodies nowadays.
Right.
Whereas acute inflammation is going to be that inflammation that is specifically brought about just because of a response that your body is acting upon, such as if you get a cut or if you get a bruise, of course you want your body to inflame that area, get it red, get it puffy, because those are the defenses against bacteria and foreign invaders. And that's what sends the white blood cells to an area and sends clotting factors to, repair and cease the bleeding and whatnot. When it comes to like exercise, of course, we don't have any like external type of, well, as long as you don't trip and fall down a trail, we don't have any like external, like visual sense of the damage that has happened to the body. But of course, we know that like, hey, after an ultramarathon or even a typical run, like sometimes we get swelling in the joints. Sometimes we get like tightness in the quads. That's a little bit of inflammation. Sometimes we get a little bit of pain in the back of the heel, right? But of course, we all have these aches and pains from training that will like go away after like either a couple minutes or a couple hours worth of rest, or even just a quick foam roller or stretch session. So do I think that those like acute inflammatory markers need to be like quelled right away? Probably not, because it's that like response that your body needs to say like, hey, like this area isn't as strong as we need it to be. Let's clean it up. Let's get it a little bit stronger. Let's repair the muscle fiber in there, the tendinous fiber, and then move forward. So I have the article, and we can definitely put this in the show notes for anybody that wants to read the entire thing. I think it's absolutely amazing, and it's a pretty short article. It talks about different inflammatory responses in the body. It talks about how exercise influences those. And I really like this quote that I was reading earlier this morning. And it says, like all good things in life, our bodies love balance and moderation, or scientifically speaking, homeostasis. When we are too cold, our body heats itself back up to normal. When we are too hot, we sweat to cool to survive. The immune system works the same way. Too little inflammation or a weak immune response, our bodies become compromised and we get sick. Likewise, too strong of a reaction can cause chronic inflammation and autoimmunity, or our body fighting itself. So while it's good for inflammation to rise and repair the damage done during intense workouts, we need to allow time for our bodies to heal and recover to keep inflammation at bay. So I think that's a good wrap up of.
Absolutely. Goes right along with what we're both saying, I think.
Yep. The inflammatory response is absolutely critical for working out, for exercise. But of course, we don't want it to be ever present and impacting our day-to-day. So when we were talking about like the ice bath example, we were talking about, maybe you don't want to do that ice bath directly after a hard workout because your body hasn't had a lot of time to recognize that inflammation and then get the signal that it needs to become stronger in a particular area. Of course, when I do a lot of my recovery modalities, like I usually wait like 6 to 8 hours before incorporating a lot of them, besides like doing some light stretching or some foam rolling and mobility. So what that looks like for me is I don't like to take like my multivitamin directly after a hard workout, because that high influx of vitamin C, that high influx of vitamin E, those antioxidants are going to quell a little bit of that inflammatory response. So I like to work out hard in the morning and then take my multivitamin in the evening. There's all this discussion about, iron and athletes too. And I do know a lot of people that choose to take their iron supplement directly after exercise because your body is, in a heightened state of accumulating nutrients and nutrition and carbohydrates and water and whatnot. So it can kind of get shuttled a little bit quicker into the body. So that's just kind of a decision that everybody has to make for themselves. I don't think, it is the make or break in your athletic ability to get stronger. Like, I feel like there's a lot of performance gain to be had by people doing their workout and then taking an ice bath. But when we're talking about the science, when we're talking about the plus 0.5% in your fitness level, the plus 1% in your fitness level, if we space those out a little bit, we just give our body a little bit more time to recognize the fact that we did just crush our hard workout.
Right. And I think this conversation goes along really well. So thank you, Adrian, for this question on inflammation. But I think it goes along with our whole conversation today because we're talking about supercompensation. We're talking about balancing the hard workouts with the recovery workouts so that you're not always in a state of inflammation, right? You're giving your body a chance to recover in between those quality sessions. I think it's important. And I'm going to come back to that autoimmune athlete. I do work with other athletes with autoimmune disorders. And I like to stay really close contact with them to how they're feeling. I know from personal, you know, how I feel on a day-to-day basis. And sometimes that can impact what kind of workout that I am up for on a day. And it could be based on the foods that I ate, which impacted my inflammation, right? So I know that I'm somewhat sensitive to gluten. So if I happen to partake in eating some gluten, then I'm going to have a lot more inflammation, which might impact if I were going to have a quality workout session that day. So I think, you know, looking at those things in whole as coaches is really important too. I don't know your thoughts on that, but, or if you have anybody you're working with currently, but it's kind of a fine balance, I think.
Yep. And I think a lot of us kind of can sense this anecdotally, like, you know, the night before a long run, like we may choose to not eat certain foods because we know that like, oh man, like it really doesn't sit well with my stomach, or like sometimes I wake up the next day and I get kind of achy joints after like I, you know, partake in this routine on Friday night, you know. So I think that's something that like we all kind of have this awareness in our bodies. I know for me, the last time I really felt it was when you know, I was fueling my pre-runs with toast and butter. I was like, ah, man, like for some reason, like this is just not sitting well with my stomach right now. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Therefore, like I took a break because I was thinking to myself, you know, like after my runs, like my fingers just feel a little bit more swollen, like my knees feel a little bit more achy, my stomach is kind of turned, so I don't eat quite as much on the run. So in all of that, it's just like a low level inflammatory response because there's something inside of my body that like it doesn't necessarily want in it right now, especially if I'm going to be doing harder exercise. I think that if we're more sedentary or more in like a recovery mode, we can kind of get away with some of that stuff because, you know, like if we're just sitting like doing computer work or studying or doing light movement and activities, you know, there's not such a fine line between like what works for our body or what doesn't. Like say if you eat gluten on a typical day that like maybe you don't have a long run, it's like, oh yeah, like it might sit weird in your stomach, but then you'll be fine a couple hours later. Whereas like when you go out and you're trying to perform in your run, then all of a sudden it causes this extra type of damage to your workout because now you're asking your body to perform in a non-optimal state, and that compromise the workout. And then, you know, if we're going to compromise our workouts, then we're not going to get as good of adaptations from them.
Right. And I just think it's important to think about the inflammation because some of us with autoimmune have that all the time, right? So what can we do to optimize that? And what can we do to pair our workouts that are optimal for days? You know, there are people with other autoimmune disorders where they may have flare-ups occasionally, right? I've had a few flare-ups in my life, but it's not constant. Other disorders are. And so, you know, planning around that is going to be a big key piece for inflammation, I think, as well, because when they're having those flare-ups, there's a lot of inflammation going on. It's going to definitely impact your workout in some way. So, you know, being aware of that, again, comes back to listening to your body and seeing like, how can I make this work with my schedule? And I think keeping active is also like huge in helping with reducing our inflammation.
Yep, absolutely. I love it. So inflammation is not the big scary bad guy that everybody makes it out to be. It is a necessary immune response that can sometimes go haywire. So we want to control it. We want to keep it as low as we can, but also we don't want to eliminate it, especially when we have these workouts, because we do want our bodies to recognize the workouts. So let's try as best as we can to keep the low level chronic inflammation at bay. So that way, when we do need to call upon that inflammatory response to help us get better, we can do so acutely through our workouts.
Absolutely. And we do have a discount code on our trailrun.coach page under our nutrition services for Inside Tracker. So people that are interested in checking out Inside Tracker, it's right there.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, I think that was, you know, like some good conversation about recovery, adaptation, and some good anecdote on like, how do we feel about our training? And I think these are a lot of questions that people have to ask themselves when they're training is, you know, how, like, am I adapting or am I recovering right now? Do I feel like, man, I'm crushing it and I'm getting better and like my workouts feel easier than they were before? Or do you feel like, yeah, I feel the mounting fatigue and like I can tell that like I'm going to need a recovery week soon. Otherwise I might get injured or I might get sick. Right. So So for everybody that's out there, think about your training, think about where you're at, talk with your coach about what you should be feeling. Because, you know, we don't want to feel like we should be recovering when in our plan, it's like, oh, I should be fairly well adapting to this right now. So that's something that you can always modify with the coach. But take care, everybody. Thank you for spending some time with us and giving us your ears. We greatly appreciate it. Us coaches too, like Loretta and I love conversing with people on Facebook about topics that we discuss on the podcast. So feel free to comment, share, like, subscribe, do all those cool things. We love to hear feedback. So let us know what you think. Let us know how you're combating inflammation. Let us know things that, you know, like get your inflammation sky high. So we'd love to start a conversation and talk about how we can make all runners feel better and run faster.
Absolutely. And we did do a little new branding. So our pages for Instagram and Facebook are Ornery Mule Coaching. So like us, find us on there, and we will add some of the links that we talked about today in the graph so people can see what we talked about if you're only listening.
Perfect. Thanks, Loretta. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.